Hi, my name is Noah, and today we're going to be talking about the industrial workers of the world. Our topic is explain why the industrial workers of the world grew so rapidly and aroused so much opposition. Well, our thesis is, the industrial workers of the world was a reactionary movement to the Gilded Age, an era in American history marked by unprecedented growth of big business, many times at the expense of the average industrial worker. The harsh working conditions, alongside many other economic and social ills, around the turn of the century created many progressive reform movements that sought to improve the conditions of society. The industrial workers of the world was one of such movements. A more radical version of the American Federation of Labor, the IWW took in many immigrants, women, and African Americans, which helped stimulate its rapid growth. However, taking a radical socialist stance on labor, such as the supplanting of capitalism and wage labor in favor of a democratic socialist state, drew much opposition to the organization. Many Americans and capitalists were suspicious of the IWW's aim to reform the entire structure of government, labor, and economics in America. On top of this, the IWW used strikes and boycotts to achieve their goals, which made many Americans suspicious of their goals. Our video today will deal with 4 topics: the background of the IWW, why the organization grew so rapidly, and why they had so much opposition, and alongside that, their long-lasting effects. In order to understand the IWW and their effects on American society, we need to first step back and look at the history of the organization. The IWW was founded in Chicago, a city known for its harsh industrial working conditions, in 1905. The founding happened at a convention of hundreds of socialist, anarchist, and Marxist trade unionists who opposed the policies of the American Federation of Labor. Many prominent founders included Eugene V. Debs and William Haywood. Many of the founders created the IWW because they felt that the American Federation of Labor was doing a bad job in organizing workers' rights and including the working population as a whole. This includes African Americans and women. Many of the founders of the organization were famous in events such as the Pullman Strike of 1894 and the Homestead Strike of 1892. The organization's ultimate goal was to overthrow the wealthy class and create a society based around the worker. This was an extremely radical idea at the time and was met with extreme hostility. Rather than a single leader, the IWW believed in an organization characterized by cooperative management. The unionists would work together to get things done and answer to no one but themselves, and this, again, was an extremely radical way of thinking. They were advocates of a working-class revolution that would change society for the better. Their means of doing this revolution was through something called the General Strike. The General Strike is a strike that involves workers of every background and every trade simultaneously going on strike to disrupt industry and production in order to bring about massive change. And, well, the IWW's methods to achieve their goals was called direct action. This involved the organization using large amounts of propaganda, strikes, and boycotts rather than the implementation of political policies to further their agenda. The use of direct action made the IWW a central topic amongst workers, employers, and politicians due to the potential influence it could have on American society. It was clear that the IWW had a large impact on American society, but the question is, why did it grow? How was this new, radical organization able to amass the manpower and stay afloat during a period of extreme disdain for socialistic values? Well, here's how they grew.
The Industrial Workers of the World was an extremely radical organization that threatened the establishment of the American labor and economic system, so it was a wonder that they were able to garner mass support. The paramount cause for their rapid growth was their disagreement with the American Federation of Labor on many principles. The workers and unionists who didn't want to be a part of the AFL for ideological or labor reasons joined the IWW. One of the biggest of these reasons is that the AFL limited membership to certain people. Membership restraints were placed on immigrants, African Americans, women, and even the Chinese on the West Coast. Their promise of rapid change also drew many new members to the organization. The harsh working conditions at the time, as shown in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911, showed that there was a much-needed change to the way labor was done in America. The many organized strikes and boycotts brought about disruption in industries of many major industrial cities such as Pittsburgh, Chicago, Cincinnati, in New York City. The IWW's widespread use of propaganda also drew many new members and reached a large audience with its promise of a working class revolution. This promise would prove to be a very powerful one worldwide, especially in the 20th century. However, this promise of revolution was not received well with established industry, men, and politicians because it threatened to overthrow American values. The industrial workers of the world was a pivotal part of the progressive era and fought hard for the rights of workers all across America and the world. But in response to the drive for workers' rights, they garnered much opposition. Here's how this mass opposition came to be.
The industrial workers of the world were able to gain a lot of support from disenfranchised workers. However, this was at the expense of their reputation in the eyes of pretty much everyone else. The leader of the IWW, William Haywood, was considered by many politicians and news sources at the time as the most dangerous man in America. The socialist promise of a labor revolution made many Americans extremely uncomfortable, especially after the communist Russian Revolution of 1917. That revolution instigated the famous First Red Scare in the United States and led to the persecution of socialists and suspected socialist sympathizers all across America, which was the eventual downfall of the IWW. Another reason the IWW had large amounts of hostility was their involvement in nationwide strikes and boycotts, which harmed American industry and to many Americans seemed like an attack on the American economy and their livelihoods. The strikes in major US cities and centers of industry angered many industrialists because the IWW was ruining American economic competitiveness globally. In order to see the extent of the IWW's influence, would you please refer to the maps that were passed out at the beginning of this presentation and take note of the dots and the questions on the paper for a few moments? Okay. Looking at the map, it's obvious that the IWW had a large role in American industry at the time, and their influence truly was nationwide. The reach made many Americans worried of the labor revolution that could be starting right in their own backyard. The growing strength of unionism in the US during the Progressive Era made it markedly different from the Gilded Age in respects to workers' rights and the weakening of large trusts such as J.D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil due to the Sherman Antitrust Act, and going even further, the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, ensuring that big business cannot hold a monopoly on goods. The IWW was truly an important segment of this new century of change and left long-lasting impressions on the US and the world. Many of these impressions, such as workers' rights, are still felt today. And this has been the origin, the spread, and the counters to the industrial workers of the world. Thank you for watching.